Hi, I'm Malavika, the English major, here with a review of Camanchaca by Diego Zuniga. Zuniga. It's been a while since I've taken Spanish. So this is kind of an unusual book for me, and it's probably an unusual book for a lot of you. This is apparently Zuniga's first book, and he is a Chilean writer, and this is actually a translation of his book. It was originally written in Spanish. Like I said, it's been a while since I've taken Spanish, so I have not read the original. And like I said, this is unusual for me. I've been trying to expand sort of what I read, so last time I was at my local library and I just went straight to the new releases section, just curious as to what I would find. I thought I'd needed to read something new for a change. I'm usually delving into older stuff, tried and true writers, that sort of thing, and I thought, you know what, let's see what the new release section has. Let's see what I can find. And I found Camanchaca. And so I picked it up, and I've always been attracted to short books. This is a very short book. It barely cracks 110 pages. And the reason I've always liked short books is not because, like, they're quick to read, but because I feel like you condense a lot of your material really well in a short book. That isn't to say that I don't like long books. My favorite book of all time, which I'll probably get to a review of eventually, my favorite book of all time is about 667 pages. So I do like a long book every now and then, but this book is short, and I tend to like a lot of short fiction. Another reason I kind of like this is because it's not a novel, really. It's not like a typical novel format. Like, if I showed this to you, a lot of pages are just like a single paragraph, or in some cases, like even just a couple sentences. Some are a full page. Some are just a couple of sentences or one sentence on a single page. So this reads a lot like prose poems that are sort of connected by this single narrative. And I love that style. I write a lot in that style. That's a style I gravitate towards. And I sort of picked this up hoping I'd learn a little more about the format and hopefully pick up a few things for my own writing. I wanted to see what I could learn from Diego Zuniga, especially since this book was lauded by a lot of critics. They say he's someone to look out for. It was an independently published sort of book, and I like that. I dig that sort of thing. So I picked this up, and it's a really short read. You can read it in an afternoon. It's a short read, and I just have some thoughts on it. So I want to say before I start that this is a translation. Like I said before, this has been translated pretty recently. The book itself was published in 2017, and then this was translated in 2017. It's not like a long time happened between writing and translation, but it is a translation, and part of me is reluctant to review the language of a translation because how well can you actually judge that? How much creative liberty has been taken with the translation of a work? Some translations are better than others. A good example I like to give is one of my favorite short stories of all time is The Lady with the Pet Dog by Anton Chekhov, which was originally written in Russian. I have read about 3 different translations of this work, and I've read this story so much that little deviations in translations bother me, like how they refer to the dog. Some editions call him a Pomeranian, some call him a Spitz. And then there's just these little variations, and even though it doesn't really impact the plot a lot, I find the subtle differences in language can really make a difference to the story as a whole. So I understand differences in language, and it makes me reluctant to review this, but I'm going to give it the best shot I have, and I have to be honest with you. I wanted to like this a lot more than I did. I had this impression that when you have these short paragraphs and these just short little lines, you're going to get a lot condensed into it. You're going to get a lot of imagery condensed in there, some really beautiful imagery, some really beautiful metaphors, evocative language, some sort of new way of looking at tried and true themes. And what I got in here was a lot of repetitiveness. So the basic plot of this is that the main character, who I assume to be Diego himself, he's not really named at all, but it reads very autobiographical, and if you look into a little bit of his history, it makes sense. I could be wrong on this. If any of you have read it, feel free to call me out. But, so the main character is sort of like in his early 20s, and it kind of goes back and forth between his relationship with his mother and this road trip he's taking with his father. And his relationship with his mother is a little fraught. They're very enmeshed. What I mean by that is they have a very uncomfortable sort of intimacy. They're all each other has. Like, his mom and dad have been separated for a long time. His mom doesn't really have anyone else, and it gets really uncomfortable in certain parts, just letting you know this is not a comfortable read. And on the other hand, you have his absentee, mostly father, who's very emotionally distant, but trying to do the best he can. You get that impression. Then there's a lot of darkness within the family as a whole. There's the mysterious death of his uncle that comes up a lot. And all these threads are interesting, but none of them are realized. None of them. And I realize that probably is the point here, but this is not a satisfying read. This is a read that just leaves you thinking, you're thinking that's it, and I did all that at the same time. You feel like you've invested too much time and not enough time at all into this one book, and it just leaves you with this very unsatisfied feeling. You don't really know what's up with him and his mom. There's so many unanswered questions. I don't think there's going to be a sequel to this. I think the point was that a lot of it stays unanswered. And I have the impression that there's a lot of historical background here that I'm missing. Especially, I'm not going to spoil the end for you, because that seems to be the only sort of twist and shift in narrative, but the ending of this book sort of implies that there is some historical background that I'm not aware of, so maybe if you're more familiar with South American or Chilean history, you might be. But basically, you constantly hear him mulling over certain aspects of his family, like his missing cousin, or the death of his Uncle Neno, and his mom just not really knowing where she belongs, and that sort of uncomfortable intimacy that she has with her son, and then his father's sort of coming in and out. There's a lot to here, and you don't really learn much about anybody. It's sort of harping on the same points over and over. And I like that to an extent. It's sort of deconstructing your idea of a fluid narrative, because this is not a linear story. There's a lot of times he kind of jumps back and forth, and it sort of moves, and then it comes back. You're not really getting a similar sort of story. You're not getting an easy pattern, and I like that to an extent, but there's got to be some payoff, and there's no payoff here. And there are parts here, and then with the actual language itself, this is when I want to come back to it being a translation. So if you look here, there's a lot of empty space sort of on the page, and that's sort of implied with these short little passages. There's no chapters here, there's no like denoting which is which, but it's like nothing is longer than a page. And most of it is like half a page or a little bit less. And so you see a lot of physical emptiness here, and a lot of the language itself sort of involves emptiness. And the best way I can tell you is for me to just read part of this to you. So I just turned to a random page, and I'm going to read a little section to you. It was one of those nights in total darkness when my mother told me what happened to my Uncle Neno. She said there was a lot I didn't know, that it hadn't been her idea to lie to me, but she'd made an agreement with my grandparents. And she told the story, in complete detail, full of silences. A few days after that, we'd never mention Uncle Neno again. A few days after that, there'd be another story nobody would want to tell. So there's a lot of power here in the simplicity of language, and I appreciate that. The problem is this entire book reads that way. It reads in this, it occupies this vague, empty space, and it operates in generalities. The protagonist rarely gets specific about anything, and the whole book reads as vast and empty, and I sort of get that as a thematic lens. I think that's what they were going for, because they're going on this road trip through these bleak, desert-like areas, so I understand that, but overall, I guess just to sum up, I could talk about this book for a long time. I honestly could, because I feel like there's so much here that you can dissect, down to the very inscrutable characters, to the simplistic, sort of bare-bones prose, but in the end, like, if you read, and this was not an easy read, it was a short read, but it's not an easy read, because you keep coming back to the same passages, and you keep sort of reviewing the same text over and over, thinking, what am I missing? And there are parts I'm certain I've missed things. Things are going from one end to the other, and I don't know what's happened. And you find that sometimes with books, but to me, this wasn't enough payoff for what it took to read this. Not that it's a bad book, I appreciate what it was trying to do. I would probably give this a 5, like just a mediocre sort of 5 out of 10. And if you're into sort of a difficult short read, if you're curious about this sort of fiction, I'd recommend it, but to the general population, probably not. I've read a lot of work that sort of operates in this space and functions a lot better than Camanchaca did. Maybe the Spanish translation sounds better. Maybe. I'm frankly not sure. So yeah, this was a bit of a step out of my comfort zone, even though I wasn't the biggest fan of it. I definitely don't regret that at all. So yeah, if you liked what you saw in this video, feel free to like, subscribe, and comment any suggestions for more books I should cover, or what you might have thought of this book. Have you read it? So yeah, good luck, happy reading, and hope you enjoyed it.